Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Paranoid Stories. Today, I am back with 10 chilling Appalachian horror stories. In this episode, we will venture deep into the ancient mountains and forgotten hollows of Appalachia, a vast primeval wilderness where history is buried just beneath the topsoil, and the secrets of the ridges are guarded with malevolent intent. These narratives have been carefully crafted, drawing from the terrifying experiences of locals, park rangers, folklorists, and descendants who claim to have witnessed things in these deep woods that should not exist. From the unsettling silence of forgotten coal towns to spectral figures tending lonely fields and voices that mimic lost travelers, these accounts span generations of those who have learned why certain places carry warnings passed down through bloodlines. These are not fictional campfire tales. They are verified encounters from individuals who suddenly found themselves subject to the unforgiving, possessive will of the mountains. To protect the privacy of those involved, names and specific locations have been carefully altered while preserving the terrifying authenticity of each encounter. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Paranoid Stories for daily true horror content that explores the darkest corners of our world. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the wilderness reveals its most guarded secrets. Now let us begin our journey into the heart of Appalachian terror. The cabin sat at the end of a rutted dirt road, swallowed by the hollers of West Virginia, like a secret someone had tried to forget. My Uncle Harlan had left it to me in his will, a crumbling heap of weathered pine and sagging roof buried under kudzu and years of neglect. I'd come here to fix it up, maybe sell it, or just to get away from the noise of the city for a spell. I'm Dane Crow, 38, a mechanic by trade with calluses thicker than my patience for small talk. The isolation suited me at first, the way the wind hissed through the oaks, carrying the faint rot of damp earth. It took a week of sweat and splinters to clear the worst of the overgrowth. I'd hauled in supplies from town a good 20 miles away and set up a makeshift kitchen in the main room, where the stone hearth still held a faint char from Harlan's fires. One afternoon, as I was prying up floorboards to check for rot, my crowbar caught on something solid beneath the subfloor. Not a beam, but a trap door, rusted and disguised under layers of dust. I wedged it open, and a cool, musty breath rose from the dark. A root cellar, hidden like it was meant to stay that way. Flashlight in hand, I descended the narrow steps, the air thickening with the scent of earth and something sharper, like bruised leaves. Shelves lined the walls, jars upon jars of preserves, their glass clouded but intact. I wiped one clean. Inside, dried bundles of what looked like mountain mint, ginseng roots twisted like old fingers, and sassafras bark. Appalachian herbs, the kind Harlan used to brew teas for ailments nobody talked about. He was a herbalist of sorts, or so the family stories went, always muttering about the old ways before he shut himself away up here after Aunt May passed. I hauled a few jars up, figuring they'd add flavor to my meals. Why waste them? That first night, I simmered some of the ginseng into a stew with venison I'd brought frozen from town. The root dissolved slow, giving the broth a deep, earthy tang that warmed me through as I ate by lantern light. Sleep came easy, but in the morning, the woods outside seemed closer. The trees leaned in a little more, their branches whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. I shook it off. Long days of labor, that's all. By the third day, I'd incorporated more of the herbs, a pinch of the mint in my coffee, sassafras steeped for a side dish. The flavors were potent, stirring memories I'd buried deep. Harlan's voice echoed in my head, gruff and unyielding, recounting how Pa had favored my brother over me, leaving me the scraps while he handed the family garage to him. Resentments I'd thought long gone bubbled up, sour and insistent, like the steam from my pot. I found myself pacing the porch at dusk, staring at the empty road, wondering if my brother had ever regretted it. The cabin felt smaller, the walls pressing in with the weight of unspoken grudges. Town was a necessary evil for supplies, so I drove out that afternoon, gravel crunching under the tires. Elias, the old grocer who'd known Harlan, nodded at me over the counter. "Fixin' up the place? Good on you. Your uncle was a peculiar one, keeping to himself." His eyes lingered a beat too long as I paid for nails and flour. On the way back, I noticed a pickup parked at the trailhead near the holler's edge. Neighbors from the scattered farms, maybe. They were just sitting there, engines off, faces turned toward my road. I waved, but they didn't wave back. Silent, like they were waiting for something. Back at the cabin, I chopped wood for the fire, the axe biting into logs with a rhythm that steadied my nerves. But as the sun dipped, those old family shadows grew longer. That night I dreamed of Harlan, his face gaunt in the lamplight, stirring a pot of something dark and viscous. "The roots remember, Dane," he said, his voice gravelly. "They pull what's buried right to the top." I woke with the taste of bitterness on my tongue, the kind that lingers after a fight you never finished. The herbs called to me now, or at least that's how it felt. I ground more of the ginseng into a rub for potatoes roasted over the hearth, the aroma filling the cabin like incense from a forgotten ritual. Eating alone by the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, not from the dark corners, but from outside. The next morning, as fog clung to the hollers, I stepped out to check the traps I'd set for rabbits. Footprints circled the clearing, boot prints, fresh and deliberate. Not animals, neighbors perhaps, drawn by curiosity or something else. I called out, "Who's there?" But only the wind answered, rustling leaves that sounded like muffled voices. Isolation had always been my armor, but now it frayed at the edges. I drove to town again, needing human contact to ground me. At the diner, a plate of eggs and bacon waited, but I couldn't resist adding a sprig from the jar tucked in my coat. The waitress, a woman named Clara with laugh lines etched deep, poured my coffee. "Heard you're up at Harlan's old place. Folks say he kept strange company in those jars of his." I laughed it off, but her gaze held a quiet watchfulness, like she knew more than she let on. On the drive home, that same pickup was there. 2 men inside, faces I vaguely recognized from church suppers years back. They didn't move as I passed, just stared, unblinking. By the end of the week, the cabin was half restored, the roof patched, walls shored up. But I was coming undone. The sassafras tea I'd brewed left my thoughts tangled in family thorns. How Ma had died young, leaving Harlan to raise us, his bitterness seeping into every meal. How he'd favored my brother too, whispering secrets to him about the land's old spirits while I fixed fences alone. I saw it all sharper now, resentments blooming like weeds in cracked soil. Outside, the woods pressed closer, branches scraping the windows like insistent knocks. And the neighbors? They appeared more often, shadows at the tree line, a silhouette on the ridge at dawn. Never approaching, never speaking, just watching. Elias from the store drove by once, slowing to a crawl, his face pale in the truck's cab. I confronted Harlan's ghost in my mind that night, stirring another pot with the last of the herbs. "What did you leave me?" I muttered to the empty room. The broth simmered, releasing vapors that twisted memories into something alive, resentful. I ate, and the cabin seemed to breathe with me, walls echoing faint murmurs. Perhaps the wind, perhaps not. Footsteps crunched outside, deliberate and unhurried. I peered through the curtain. 3 figures now, standing at the edge of the yard, faces obscured by dusk. Neighbors, all of them adults I'd nodded to in passing over the years, now silent sentinels to my unraveling. They didn't advance, but their presence clawed at the isolation I'd sought, turning it inside out. That was 2 weeks ago. I've stopped cooking with the herbs, but the jars sit on the shelf, their contents shifting subtly in the low light, as if waiting. The cabin's nearly whole now, but I'm not. The watchers come every evening, closer each time, their silence louder than any accusation. Family resentments unearthed, pulling me under like roots in the dark soil. And in the quiet hours, I wonder if Harlan knew, if he hid that cellar not to bury the past, but to let it grow. The hollers keep their secrets, but they've started sharing mine. I've always trusted my gear more than my gut. Out here in the Smoky Mountains, that's kept me alive through enough solo surveys to pay the bills. Name's Harlan Beck, and I'm the guy companies call when they want forgotten trails, mapped without the hassle of a full crew. This job was standard. Trace old paths near the Tennessee-North Carolina line, mark boundaries for some land developer sniffing around for timber rights. I packed light. Backpack with topo maps, a handheld GPS, compass, and enough MREs for a week. Left my truck at the trailhead at dawn, boots crunching on damp pine needles, the air thick with that earthy rot you only get at elevation. The first glitch hit around noon. I'd been following a ridgeline, inputting waypoints as I went when the GPS screen flickered. Coordinates jumped, then reset to my starting point. I stopped, frowned at it, and rebooted the unit. Happened again 5 minutes later. "Battery's fine," I muttered to myself, checking the display. Signal was strong. Satellites shouldn't be an issue this high up. I pulled out the paper map, cross-referenced my position. Close enough. Kept moving. By mid-afternoon, the glitches turned into full-on tantrums. The arrow spun like a drunk compass, pointing me off-trail into denser brush. Fog was starting to roll in from the valleys, the kind that clings to your skin and muffles sounds. I could hear the distant call of a turkey vulture, sharp and echoing, but closer in, everything felt swallowed. My throat went dry as I pushed through rhododendron thickets, thorns snagging my pants. "Come on," I said, slapping the GPS against my palm. It beeped erratically, then went blank for a good 10 seconds before spitting out nonsense, coordinates that placed me miles east over the state line. I wasn't panicking yet. These mountains play tricks, interference from the ridges maybe. I relied on the compass, veering back toward what I figured was the main trail. But the undergrowth thickened, roots twisting like veins under the soil. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill, and my hands started to shake, not from cold, but that nagging itch that something was off. Hours slipped by. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows that merged with the fog. I should have hit camp by now. Instead, I stumbled into a clearing. It wasn't natural. The trees ringed it tight, pines and oaks forming a ragged circle, but the ground inside was bare, like something had scraped it clean decades ago. Moss clung to rocks, and in the center, rusted metal stakes protruded from the earth. Survey markers, old ones. I knelt by the nearest, brushing dirt from the plate. Etched letters. T. Harlan Prop, 1923. Harlan. My last name, but no relation I knew of. Curiosity pulled me to the next. NC boundary dispute. Unresolved. No trespass. The metal was pitted, edges flaked with rust, but the warning was clear. I remembered stories from my grandfather, a surveyor himself. Back in the 20s, feuds over these hills turned bloody. Families claiming timberland, drawing lines that the government never settled. Moonshiners and loggers clashing, bodies vanishing into the fog. This clearing felt like ground zero for one of those fights. My breath came quicker as I paced the perimeter. 4 more markers, all dated 23 to 25, spelling out overlapping claims. One even had faint initials scratched in. HB. Harlan Beck? No, couldn't be. Coincidence had to be. But the fog thickened fast now, dropping visibility to 20 feet. It pressed in heavy and damp, soaking through my jacket. The air grew still, no wind, no bird calls, just the soft patter of mist on leaves, distant and insistent, like a crowd murmuring. I checked the GPS again. Dead now. Screen black. Compass needle quivered, refusing to settle. All right, Harlan, I told myself, voice low to cut the silence. Backtrack. Find the trail. But as I turned, that pressure started. Not a sound, not a shape, just a weight on my chest, like the air itself was thickening, pushing down. My shoulders tensed, muscles aching as if someone had draped a lead blanket over me. I shook it off, stepped toward the tree line. The ground felt wrong underfoot, softer like it was yielding too much, roots shifting subtly beneath the sod. Pushed on, but the clearing wouldn't let go. Every direction looped me back. Same markers, same bare patch. Fog swirled thicker, tendrils curling around my ankles. My heart hammered steady, not racing, but insistent, and my fingers went numb, fumbling the compass. I stopped, leaned against a pine. Bark rough under my palms, but the tree seemed to lean back just a fraction, as if resisting my weight. This is bullshit, I whispered, wiping sweat from my eyes. The pressure built, coiling in my gut, making each breath shorter. Invisible hands pressing my ribs, not hard enough to hurt, but enough to remind me I wasn't alone. Memories flickered, Grandpa's tales of the mountains holding grudges, land claimed by blood, boundaries etched in disputes that the fog never forgot, trespassers found with their packs empty, compasses crushed, faces blank like they'd wandered off a map. I'd laughed it off as old man stories. Now, in the haze, the markers gleamed faintly, rust catching what little light pierced through. One stake tilted slightly, as if the earth had nudged it. My mouth dried out, tongue sticking to the roof. I tried to shout, test the air, but my voice came out flat, absorbed by the mist. Hours blurred. I walked, or thought I did. The pressure mounted, squeezing my temples, blurring my vision at the edges. Sounds warped. The drip of water from branches stretched into low echoes, like whispers arguing over territory. My legs grew heavy, boots sinking deeper with each step, soil reluctant to release. I clawed at a marker, yanked it free, metal cold, heavier than it should be. Inscribed deeper now? No, my eyes playing tricks. But the initials, HB, clear as day. Harlan Beck, from 24. The weight crushed in then, full force, pinning me to my knees. Not pain, just insistence. The land saying, "You're on the wrong side. Stay." I don't know how long I knelt there, fog wrapping tighter, the clearing shrinking around me. My hands trembled as I gripped the stake, knuckles white, breath ragged in my throat. No escape in sight, just the markers standing sentinel, the dispute unresolved pulling me into it. The mountains didn't forget, and now they had a Beck to settle the score. The drive back to Harlan felt longer than it should have. The highway flanked by hills scarred from decades of strip mining, their slopes bare and slumped like old wounds. I hadn't set foot in this Kentucky coal town since I left for college at 18, chasing a life that didn't involve black lung or 12-hour shifts underground. Now, at 37, I was pulling in for Aunt Clara's funeral. Cancer, they said on the phone, quick and merciless. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as the town's faded sign came into view. "Welcome to Harlan, pride of the Cumberland." The church sat at the edge of Main Street, its steeple leaning slightly from subsidence, the ground here always shifting. I parked amid a handful of battered pickups and walked in, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and candle wax. The pews held maybe 20 people, faces etched with the kind of weariness that came from too many winters without work. Reverend Hale, who'd baptized me as a kid, stood at the pulpit, his voice steady as he led the opening hymn. I knew the words to Amazing Grace by heart, but halfway through the second verse, the congregation's voices veered into something unfamiliar. "Through the deep veins we wander, lost in the earth's cold hold," they sang, low and rhythmic, like a chant from some forgotten ritual. I glanced around, but no one else seemed to notice. My cousin Ellie, sitting beside me, her hands folded in her lap, joined in without hesitation. I kept my mouth shut, lips pressed thin, and by the end a chill settled in my chest, unrelated to the draft from the cracked windows. After the service, we gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee and condolences. Ellie poured me a styrofoam cup, her eyes red-rimmed but sharp. "Theo, it's good you came. Clara would have wanted it." She was in her 40s now, still living in the family house up on the ridge, working odd jobs since the last mine closed 15 years back. "Yeah," I said, forcing a nod. "Town looks rough." Empty storefronts lined the street outside, boards over windows, and the air carried a faint sulfur tang from the old tipples. She shrugged, stirring sugar into her cup. "Folks make do. Mines are sealed, but the work dried up anyway. Government's promises, you know." Her gaze flicked toward the window, then back. "You staying at the old place?" I nodded. Aunt Clara's house, my grandparents before her, had been willed to me and Ellie jointly. I'd crash there a couple nights to sort papers, then head back to Lexington. Just for a bit. Reverend Hale approached then, clapping a hand on my shoulder. His grip lingered a second too long, calluses rough against my jacket. "Theo Vance, been too long. The deep veins call us home, don't they?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes, shadowed under bushy brows. I managed to chuckle, though my throat felt dry. "Guess so, Reverend. That hymn, new version?" He tilted his head. "Old as the hills, son. Keeps the faith alive down here." He wandered off to console an elderly widow, leaving me with Ellie, who avoided my eyes. That night the house creaked under the weight of silence. I'd aired it out earlier, dust motes dancing in the slanted light, but the floorboards in the spare room upstairs still groaned like they remembered heavier boots. I lay in the sagging bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, the day's strangeness gnawing at me. The hymn's words echoed, deep veins, and I wondered if it was just local flavor, a holdover from the mining days when faith and fear blurred in the dark. Sleep came fitfully, broken by the wind rattling the shutters. Then, around 2 a.m., I heard it, a faint scratching from below the floorboards. Not mice, too deliberate, like nails dragging slow across wood, pausing, then resuming. My heart picked up, a steady thud against my ribs. I sat up, sheets pooling at my waist, and pressed my ear to the floor. The sound persisted, muffled but insistent, accompanied by a low murmur, like voices carried up from a well. Mina's laments, I thought, unbidden, the kind my grandfather used to hum after a bad shift, tuneless, weary phrases about the mountain's grudge. I pulled back, palms damp against the cool boards. It had to be the house settling, or pipes groaning in the walls. Harlan was built on coal seams. The ground whispered secrets all the time. But as I lay there, the scratching faded, replaced by the quiet that pressed in heavier, making my breaths shallow. Doubt crept in, the kind that starts as a question and burrows deeper. What if the hymns weren't just words? What if the town held something more than grief? The next morning broke gray, rain pattering against the panes. I found Ellie in the kitchen, flipping through old photo albums at the table. "Slept okay?" she asked, not looking up. "Fine," I lied, pouring coffee. My hands shook slightly as I lifted the mug, the tremor betraying last night's unease. That scratching in the walls? Rodents? Her knife paused mid-butter on toast. Scratching? She set it down, eyes narrowing. "Haven't heard anything. Probably the foundation, house is old. I nodded, but the way she gripped the knife said otherwise. We spent the day sorting Clara's things, bills, faded letters, a miner's lamp gathering dust in the attic. By afternoon, I drove into town for supplies, stopping at the diner where locals nursed coffees and swapped stories. Old man Hargrove, who'd worked the shafts with my grandfather, sat at the counter, his fingers gnarled like roots. "Theo," he rasped as I ordered a sandwich. "Back for the funeral?" "Yeah, quiet place now." He grunted, staring into his cup. "Quiet's better than what was below. Deep veins took enough." His voice dropped. "We sealed 'em for a reason. After the cave-in 89, promised to keep 'em shut." I leaned in, pulse quickening. "What happened down there, really? Grandpa never talked details." Hargrove's eyes darted to the door, then back. "Accident. But some say the mountain don't forget. Whispers in the dark, scratches on the timbers. Folks sing about it in church to remember, keep the pact." He tapped the counter, knuckles white. "Don't go digging, boy. Town's held this long." I left with my sandwich uneaten, his words sticking like coal dust. That evening, as rain turned to a steady drizzle, I sat in the living room with Ellie, going over the will. The scratching started again at dusk, sharper this time from directly under the floor in the hallway. I froze, mug halfway to my lips. Ellie didn't react, but her foot tapped unevenly against the rug. "You hear that?" I asked, voice low. She glanced up, face pale in the lamplight. "Hear what?" "The noise, like something trying to get through." She swallowed, setting her papers aside. "It's nothing, Theo. Just the rain, or the veins settling." The word hung there, echoing the hymn. Her hands twisted in her lap, betraying her calm. But I couldn't shake it. Later, alone in the spare room, I paced, the floorboards flexing under my weight. The scratching returned with nightfall, rhythmic now, like fingers testing for weakness. Below it, the murmurs grew clearer, fragments of song, words twisting through the wood. "Deep veins, call us, sealed no more." My throat tightened, breath coming quick as I knelt, pressing my ear down again. The sound vibrated up my arm, cold and unyielding. I thought of the pact Hargrove mentioned, the unspoken agreement to bury the mines and the horrors they unearthed. Grandpa's stories had always skirted the edges, shadows that moved wrong, echoes of voices not human. Had the town traded silence for safety, singing their warnings in plain sight? My doubt hardened into certainty. The scratching wasn't settling earth. It was a reminder, a breach in the seal. By midnight, I couldn't stay in the room. I grabbed my keys, heading downstairs, but paused at the basement door, locked, rusted chain across it. Clara must have kept it that way. The scratching followed me, fainter here, but the murmurs swelled, a chorus of laments weaving through the house like smoke. Ellie's door creaked open upstairs. "Theo?" Her voice trembled. "Don't listen too close. They want you to." I turned the knob, chain rattling. "Who? What's down there?" She descended slowly, bathrobe clutched tight. "The old shafts run under the town. After the cave-in, they sealed them, physically, spiritually. The hymns. They remind us to keep the faith, keep the doors shut." Clara heard it too at the end, said the veins were waking. My mouth went dry, hands clenching at my sides. "And you? You sing those verses knowing?" Ellie's nod was slow. "We all do. It's how we hold on. The mountain gives, then takes. But if you open that door..." She trailed off, eyes on the chain. The scratching peaked then, urgent, as if sensing my hesitation. I stepped back, pulse hammering in my ears. In the morning I'd leave, sign the papers, hand the house to Ellie, drive away from this rotting town and its buried sins. But as I climbed the stairs, the murmurs followed, soft and insistent, promising truths the surface couldn't contain. The deep veins didn't forget. And now, neither would I. I've been patrolling these ridges for over a decade. The Blue Ridge Parkway, stretching out like a scar across the Appalachians. The job suits me. Solitary shifts, the crunch of gravel under my boots, the wind whispering through the pines. No crowds, no noise from the lowlands, just me and the mountain. That changed last week when I found the first note. It was pinned to a trail sign at the fork near Devil's Backbone, the one marking the old service path. A scrap of yellowed paper, the kind I used to jot down reports years back. The handwriting was mine, no doubt. Blocky letters, a slight slant from gripping the pen too tight after long days. It read, "Sinkhole ahead, don't go down." I did. RH 2012. My initials. The date hit me like a cold gust. That was the year of the accident when I lost my footing on a routine check and twisted my ankle so bad I thought I'd have to crawl out. But I hadn't written any warning back then. I just logged it and moved on. I pulled the pin and crumpled it in my fist, figuring some hiker with a grudge or a bored kid practicing forgery. The park gets weirdos sometimes, folks who romanticize the wilderness and leave their trash behind. I pocketed it and kept walking, the afternoon sun filtering through the canopy in sharp shafts. My radio crackled with static from dispatch, but nothing urgent. Just the usual. Watch for black bears, report any downed trees. By evening, as I looped back to my truck, another one appeared. Same spot, same sign. This time, it's not a hole, it's a pull. Stay up top. RH. My stomach tightened, a dull knot forming. I scanned the trail. No footprints in the soft earth, no one in sight. The mountain was empty, as always in this section. I tore it down and drove back to the ranger cabin, the paper burning a hole in my glove compartment. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The cabin's walls creak with the settling wood, and every shift of the floorboards had me sitting up, hand on the flashlight. Morning brought fog rolling in thick from the valleys, muting the world outside. I brewed coffee strong enough to strip paint and headed out early, determined to shake it off. Routine patrol, check the overlooks, clear any debris from slides. But at the backbone again, there it was. Third note. You'll hear your own voice down there. Ignore it. Turn back. RH 2012. My hands shook as I unpinned it, the metal clip cold against my fingers. This wasn't funny anymore. I had written those words. No. That year, I'd been green, fresh from training, too cocky to note dangers I hadn't seen. The sinkhole. I vaguely remembered rumors from old-timers, a collapse in the underbrush off the main trail, hidden by overgrowth. Never verified it myself. Why would I warn about it now to myself? I radioed in, voice steady despite the dryness in my throat. Dispatch, this is Hale. Any reports of vandalism on the Backbone Trail? Sarah's voice came back, calm as ever. Negative, Rowan. Quiet up there? Yeah, just checking. I didn't mention the notes, sounded paranoid even to me. The day dragged. I hiked the perimeter, eyes darting to every signpost. The air grew heavier, the scent of damp earth clinging to everything. By late afternoon, doubt gnawed at me. What if it was me? Some blackout, a loop in my head from stress or the isolation? I'd heard stories, rangers cracking under the solitude, seeing things that weren't there. But these were physical, tangible. I decided to investigate. If there was a sinkhole, I'd mark it, make it official, end the mystery. The descent started easy enough. The service path veered off the main trail, overgrown with ferns and vines that snagged at my pants. My boots sank into the loamy soil, each step pulling a faint suck from the ground. The fog hadn't lifted fully, turning the trees into vague silhouettes. I'd brought a rope and carabiners, standard gear, clipped to a sturdy oak at the trailhead. Just a quick look, I muttered to myself, the words echoing oddly in the hush. Deeper in, the path narrowed, roots twisting like veins across the dirt. That's when the whispers started. Not voices exactly, but the rustle of leaves mimicking speech, low and fragmented. My own voice, maybe, from years ago, calling out coordinates during a search. I shook it off, breath quickening. The air cooled, carrying a faint mineral tang, like wet stone. Then the fourth note, pinned to a bent sapling half buried in moss. This is where it pulls you under. The mistake repeats. Climb back. RH. My heart thudded hard, palms slick on the rope. I remembered now, 2012, the accident wasn't just a twisted ankle. I'd been chasing a signal, some lost tourist's phone ping, and ignored the unstable ground. Fell into a shallow depression, not a full sinkhole, but enough to sprain and scare. Why was I reliving it like this? I pressed on, the ground sloping steeper. The whispers grew clearer, overlapping. Hail, report position. My old radio chatter? Or was it now? I glanced at my pack. No radioactive. The path dipped into a ravine, walls closing in with slick rock and tangled underbrush. At the bottom, a depression yawned, not a clean hole, but a deceptive slump, camouflaged by fallen leaves and shadows. Edges crumbled under my boot as I neared, sending pebbles skittering into the dark. That's when the loop tightened. The air shimmered. Or maybe it was the fog playing tricks. And suddenly I was back there. 2012, uniform crisp, flashlight beam cutting the dusk. Got a ping, I said aloud, but it wasn't me speaking now. The words tumbled out, my voice from 12 years ago, urgent and young. I stumbled, ankle twisting on a root, pain shooting up my leg. But I was standing, whole, rope still in hand. Blinking hard, the vision faded, leaving me on my knees at the sinkhole's rim, breath ragged, dirt caked under my nails. Another note fluttered from the undergrowth as if placed just for me. You fell here. Don't repeat. The mountain remembers. RH. I snatched it, handwriting wavering now, like my hand during that long-ago pain. The whispers swelled, my own shouts for help echoing from the hole's depths. Not real sounds, but insistent, burrowing into my skull. My throat went dry, fingers numb as I gripped the rope. This wasn't investigation. It was a trap. The mountain's paths folding back on themselves, dragging me through mistakes I couldn't outrun. I tried to ascend, hauling on the rope, muscles burning, but the trail shifted, or my memory did. One moment, roots gave solid purchase. The next, I was sliding back, the 2012 version of me overlaying the present, younger hands scrabbling at loose soil. "Dispatch, I'm down!" I gasped, though no radio was on. The sinkhole loomed wider, its edges whispering my failures, the unchecked trail, the ignored hunch, the isolation that let doubt fester. Hours blurred, or minutes, time smeared like the fog. I climbed, fell, climbed again, each pull upward erasing a step forward. Notes appeared everywhere now, pinned to bark, wedged in rocks, each one a fragment. You left the gear behind. Called off the search too soon. The mountain doesn't forget. My handwriting, but the ink fresh, bleeding into the paper. Finally, hauling myself over the rim, the true rim, I collapsed against a tree, chest heaving. The backbone sign stood ahead, notes gone, trail clear, sun low, casting long shadows. Had I been down there all day? My watch read just past noon. Impossible. I staggered to the truck, radioing Sarah on the drive back. "All clear up here." My voice sounded distant, like the echoes. She replied, routine as ever. Back at the cabin, I burned the notes I'd collected, 4, 5, who knows, in the wood stove. Flames licked the paper, curling my words to ash. But as night fell, the wind through the pines carried a faint rustle like handwriting on the breeze. Patrol resumes tomorrow. The mountain waits, paths unchanged, but I check every sign now, half expecting my own warning. The sinkhole's still there, hidden, and so am I, looping back to what I can't leave behind. I never thought I'd end up back in Tennessee after all those years chasing jobs in the cities. But when Aunt Clara's will came through, the farm was mine. A small spread in the hollows of the valleys, just outside Sevierville, with rolling fields that had grown tobacco since before the war. The house was a sagging clapboard thing, paint peeling like old skin, but the land felt solid under my boots. I figured I could make a go of it. Plant the seeds, tend the crop, sell the leaves come fall, simple as that. The first few weeks were all sweat and dirt. I hired a couple of locals, old-timers named Hank and Roy, to help clear the weeds and till the soil. It was heavy clay, dark and rich, clinging to the plow like it didn't want to let go. "This ground's got memory," Hank said one afternoon, wiping his brow with a rag that looked older than he was. He was in his 60s, wiry as a fence post, and Roy nodded along, both of them chewing tobacco from some other farm. I laughed it off. Memory. Right. I'd always been the practical one, fixing engines and balancing ledgers, not chasing ghosts. By mid-spring, the seedlings were in. I watched them push through the earth, green tips breaking the surface like they were eager to breathe. The rains came heavy that season, turning the valleys into a misty bowl, and the plants shot up taller than any crop I'd seen in the old photos Clara kept. The leaves unfurled wide and glossy, veins pulsing with a color deeper than emerald, almost black in the edges, like they were holding something in. Harvest time rolled around faster than expected, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and ripening tobacco. We cut the stalks by hand, bundling them in the barn to cure. The leaves dried to a vibrant gold, too perfect, like they'd been painted. I didn't smoke much back then, just a pipe now and then to unwind. But one evening, after Roy and Hank had packed up and the sun dipped behind the ridges, I loaded the bowl with a pinch of the cured leaf. The flame caught easy, and the first draw hit smooth, filling my lungs with a warmth that spread slow, like honey through veins. I sat on the porch steps, the valley humming with crickets, and that's when the haze started. At first, it was just shapes in the tree line, pale smudges against the dark. Then the moonlight spilled over the fields, silvering the cut stumps, and they sharpened. Figures, bent at the waist, moving through the rows like they were working the soil. Long coats, maybe overalls, heads bowed low. They didn't speak, didn't look up, just tended the earth with hands that blurred at the edges, like smoke trailing off a dying fire. I blinked hard, coughed out a lungful, but they kept at it, rhythmic, endless. My pipe went cold in my hand, fingers numb. I rubbed my eyes, told myself it was the tobacco's kick, something in the strain, but deep down in the pit of my stomach, a knot tightened. The next morning, I shook it off, poured coffee black and strong, got back to work prepping for the next planting. Hank noticed the leaves when we hung the new batches. "These ain't right, Gideon," he muttered, holding one up to the light. "Too lively. Soil like this, it takes more'n it gives sometimes." Roy grunted agreement, but they didn't push. I paid them and sent them home early. That night I steered clear of the pipe. slept with the window cracked, listening to the wind rustle the remaining stalks outside. But the visions crept in anyway. Not every night, but enough to wear on me. I'd wake in the small hours, sweat-soaked, the room stuffy despite the fan whirring. Outside, under that same relentless moon, the figures would be there. More of them now, a whole crew gliding through the fields. They'd pause sometimes as if sensing me watching, their forms flickering like bad reception on an old TV. One time I swore one turned its head, just a shadow where a face should be, and my heart hammered so hard I tasted bile. I bolted the doors, checked the locks twice, but sleep wouldn't come. My hands shook when I gripped the coffee mug the next day, spilling grounds across the counter. Weeks blurred into the heat of summer. The new crop was already sprouting, faster than before, leaves curling out with that unnatural vigor. I drove into town for supplies, stopped at the feed store where the owner, a grizzled man named Elias, eyed me over his counter. "Heard you got Clara's place," he said, ringing up my order. "Good land, but watch the nights. Folks say it hungers." I forced a chuckle, paid up, but his words stuck like burrs. On the drive back, the valleys closed in, mist hanging low, and I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles whitening. By then, the figures weren't waiting for the smoke. They showed up in the corners of my vision during the day. A flash in the barn while I was stacking bales, a silhouette at the edge of the woods when I walked the fence line. Once, in the afternoon glare, I saw one kneeling by a furrow, fingers sifting the soil, and when I approached, it was gone. Just churned earth, damp and dark. My throat went dry every time, breath coming short like I'd run a mile. I started sleeping with the lights on, the old generator humming outside, but it didn't help. Dreams bled into waking, hands reaching from the dirt, pulling at roots that looked too much like veins. One dusk, as the sun bled red over the ridges, I confronted it head on. The pipe was in my hand before I could think, the vibrant leaves packed tight. I smoked deep, out in the field this time, the air still and heavy. The visions hit like a wave but clearer. The figures weren't just tending, they were harvesting something invisible, plucking at threads in the air that shimmered like heat off pavement. And then I felt it, a pull in my chest, like the land was drawing breath from me. One figure straightened closer now, its form solidifying under the emerging moon. It wasn't empty shadow. There were eyes, hollow but knowing, fixed on me. My legs buckled, knees hitting the soft earth, and I dropped the pipe, embers scattering like fireflies. I crawled back to the house, pulse thundering in my ears, every muscle aching like I'd been worked over. That night they didn't wait for moonlight. Shapes moved across the porch as I bolted the door, their steps whispering against the wood, soft, insistent, like bare feet on damp leaves. I pressed my back to the wall, breath ragged, watching the window glass fog with my own exhaling. "What do you want?" I whispered to the empty room, voice cracking. No answer, but the air grew colder, the floorboards creaking under an unseen weight. The next days I tried to leave, packed a bag, threw it in the truck, keys shaking in the ignition. But the engine sputtered, died, and when I popped the hood, the wires were frayed, as if clawed by roots. Hank wouldn't answer his phone. Roy's truck was gone from his drive. Isolation gnawed deeper than the visions. The crop overtook everything, vines twisting up the porch posts, leaves brushing the windows like fingers testing for weakness. In the quiet hours, I'd catch myself staring at the fields, a strange calm settling in, urging me to join them. It happened on a moonless night, or what should have been. The valley was pitch, but the figures glowed faint, phosphorescent, circling the house now. They didn't scare me anymore. That emotion had burned out, leaving a hollow ache in my bones. I stepped outside, bare feet sinking into the cool soil, and they parted for me. Up close, they weren't strangers. Faces I half knew. Clara, faded but there, and others, kin, long buried in the family plot. The land's harvest, it turned out, wasn't leaves or gold. It was us, bound to the dirt that birthed us, tending eternally. I knelt among them, hands in the earth, feeling the pull complete. The vibrant soil drank deep, and for the first time, peace settled. Not relief, just acceptance. The valleys keep their secrets, and now I'm part of them, waiting under the moon for the next one to plant the seeds. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as the road snaked up into the Appalachian Mountains, the kind of twists that made my old pickup truck groan like it was regretting the trip. I'm Silas Knott, a handyman from Pittsburgh with a knack for fixing what breaks, but today I was just a delivery boy for my Aunt Elara. She'd holed up in some cabin 20 miles from the nearest town, too stubborn to come down for her meds. The package sat on the passenger seat, a box of prescriptions and a few canned goods I'd thrown in. Her last call had been raspy, urgent, like she knew time was short. The sun dipped low behind the ridges, painting the pines in long shadows that clawed at the windshield. My headlights cut through the dusk as I rounded another bend, and that's when I saw it. A wall of mud and rock spilling across the pavement, steam rising from the fresh slide. I slammed the brakes, tires skidding on loose gravel. The truck fishtailed to a stop inches from the mess. No way around it. Cell signal was a joke up here, bars flickering like a dying pulse. I killed the engine and sat there, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the distant rumble of settling earth. A faded sign up ahead read, Ridgeview Diner, open late, its neon buzzing faintly against the gathering dark. I grabbed the package, locked the truck, and trudged over. The door jingled as I pushed in, and the air hit me. Grease and stale coffee thick enough to chew. 3 locals hunched at the counter, 2 men in flannel, faces weathered like old bark, and a woman with gray-streaked hair pulled back tight. The waitress, mid-40s and built solid, glanced up from wiping the counter. "Road's out," I said, dropping onto a stool. "Landslide back there." She nodded without surprise. "Happens this time of year. Rain loosens the slopes. Name's Marla. Coffee?" "Black, and whatever you've got hot." My stomach twisted from the drive, but hunger gnawed anyway. She poured, sliding over a mug that steamed against my palms. The warmth steadied my hands, which had gone clammy from the sudden stop. The men eyed me, not hostile, just appraising, like I was a stray dog wandered in. "Silas," I offered, "heading to my aunt's up the ridge. You know a way around?" The older man, with a beard like steel wool, chuckled low. "Ain't no around tonight, son. Landslide's the 3rd this week. Echoes in the wind, they say." He tapped his fork against his plate, the sound sharp in the quiet. "Echoes?" I sipped the coffee, bitter and grounding. My throat felt dry despite the heat. The woman leaned in, her voice gravelly from years of cigarettes. "Echo folk, old mountain talk, souls that got lost in the ridges back when the coal mines swallowed men whole. They don't move on, they mimic, call out like family or friends, lure you off the path. Seen it myself once, heard my brother's voice from the trees, clear as day, years after he was gone. I forced a half smile, the kind you give to shut down ghost stories. Sounds like wind playing tricks. I've hiked these parts before, just fog and owls. Marla set a plate of eggs and toast in front of me. Fog and owls don't say your name, Silas. Eat up, storm's coming. You'll bunk in the back room if it floods the lot. I dug in, the food settling heavy in my gut as the diner emptied. The locals lingered, trading glances, their stories weaving like smoke. The bearded one, Earl, spun tales of loggers vanishing in the 70s, only their echoes found yelling from hollows days later. The woman, Rita, swore her truck once stalled to the sound of her own laughter echoing back, pulling her toward a ravine. I nodded along, but my mind wandered to Aunt Elara, her voice on the phone, frail but insistent. She needed this delivery tomorrow, no excuses. Outside, rain pattered the windows, turning to a steady drum by the time Marla flipped the sign to closed. She led me to a spare room behind the kitchen. A cot, a sink, walls thin as paper. "Lock the door," she said, handing me a key. "And don't answer if something calls. Mountain's got teeth." I laughed it off, but as she left, the lock clicked louder than it should. I sat on the cot, package at my feet, staring at the peeling wallpaper. The rain swelled, wind howling through cracks like fingers prying at the seams. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind replayed the drive, the slide's fresh scar, the way the earth had shifted without warning. What if the road stayed blocked? Aunt Elara without her meds, stubborn as she was, she'd fade up there alone. Hours blurred. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, its hands jerking like a pulse. I paced the small space, boots scuffing the linoleum. Thirst pulled me to the sink. Water ran cold over my fingers, but it didn't ease the tightness in my chest. Breathing came quicker now, shallow pulls that made my ribs ache. Then I heard it, faint at first, muffled by the storm. A voice sifting through the downpour, low, familiar. My voice. "Silas, over here." I froze, water dripping from my chin. Heart thudding hard against my sternum, I wiped my mouth and pressed an ear to the thin window, fogged with condensation. The parking lot stretched black under the diner's single floodlight, rain sheeting across the gravel. The woods beyond loomed, a wall of dripping black. "Silas Knott, come on out. Road's clear now." It was me, exact timbre, the slight Pittsburgh drawl I'd carried since childhood. Not wind, not imagination. My own words, pulled from some memory, maybe the way I'd muttered to myself on the drive. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill seeping through the glass. I gripped the windowsill, knuckles paling. "Package for Elara. She's waiting." The call sharpened, laced with urgency that mirrored my own thoughts. My breath hitched, coming in short gasps that fogged the pain faster. Part of me wanted to laugh it off. Echoes from the diner vents, some cruel prank by the locals. But the voice knew my name. My aunt's, the weight in that box. It tugged, insistent, like a hand on my shoulder. I unlocked the door, stepping into the kitchen's dim glow. The diner was silent, counters gleaming under the exit sign's red haze. Rain hammered the roof, a relentless rhythm that drowned the world outside. But the voice cut through, clearer now from the direction of the lot. "Truck's fine, just a short walk." My hand trembled as I pocketed the key, the metal cold against my thigh. I shouldered the package, heavier than before, and pushed out into the storm. Wind lashed rain across my face, stinging like needles. The lot was empty, truck huddled under its tarp of water. Beyond, the woods swallowed the light, branches clawing the sky. "Silas, this way. Landslide's gone." The mimicry was perfect. My cadence, the pause before my last name. Doubt clawed up my spine, a cold sweat trickling under my shirt. Was this what they meant? Echo folk, replaying your own fears to drag you in? I scanned the tree line, squinting against the sheets of rain. Nothing, just shadows shifting like breaths. My feet moved anyway, gravel crunching under boots, drawn toward the edge. The package slipped in my grip, slick with water. Aunt Alara's face flickered in my mind, lined, expectant. What if the voice was right? What if help waited just beyond? "Silas, hurry!" Breath ragged, throat burning, I stopped at the wood's fringe. The air here smelled of wet earth and decay, sharp and alive. I called back, voice cracking. "Who are you?" The echo answered instantly, my own tone mocking me. "It's me, Silas. Don't be a fool. Don't be a..." Pulse hammering in my ears, I dropped the package and backed away. Hands shaking, I fumbled for the diner door, slamming it shut behind me. The lock turned with a finality that echoed in the empty space. I slid down against it, breath coming in heaves. The storm's roar filling the silence. Outside, the voice faded, swallowed by the rain. But in the quiet of my mind, it lingered, my own doubts, calling me back. Morning would come. The road might clear. Aunt Elara would wait another day. For now, I stayed put, the diner's walls the only thing holding the mountains at bay. I've always chased stories that linger in the cracks of places like this. North Carolina's Appalachians, where the mountains hunch like old men guarding their grudges. My name's Barrett Quill, and I'm a folklorist by trade, the kind who drives battered trucks up winding roads to document what people whisper over coffee or moonshine. This gig took me to a hollow called Blackthorn, a cluster of sagging porches and shotgun shacks clinging to slopes too steep for outsiders. I rented a cabin at the edge, a one-room deal with knotty pine walls and a wood stove that coughed smoke like a consumptive. It was late summer, the air thick with humidity and the drone of cicadas, and I figured 2 weeks would wrap up my archive of local lore. The first few days blurred into interviews. I'd park my recorder on kitchen tables scarred by generations, letting folks spin yarns while I nodded, scribbling notes. Old-timers like Harlan, a wiry man with tobacco-stained teeth, leaned in close when they talked about the whisper winds. "They ain't just breezes, son," he said, his voice gravelly from years of pipe smoke. "Come down from the ridges at dusk, carrying what folks ain't said out loud. Secrets mostly, grievances that fester. You hear 'em murmuring through the pines, and next thing the whole holler knows your shame." I recorded it all, the cadence of their drawls pulling me in. Women like Bessie, who ran the general store, added layers. how the winds tangled family feuds, twisting words until lies became truth. "My gran said they weave you in," she told me over a tin of biscuits. "If you speak careless, your own voice comes back at you, laced with what the mountains hold against you." I laughed it off as metaphor, the recorder's red light steady as I thanked them and packed up. By evening, I'd hole up in the cabin, play back the tapes to transcribe. The woods outside rustled faintly, but it was just wind, I told myself. Ordinary, indifferent. That changed on the fourth night. I'd spent the day with a group at the community hall, a drafty building smelling of damp plaster. They passed a jug and took turns, voices overlapping in the dim light. One man, Jed, grumbled about land disputes, how his neighbor's fence crept inch by inch onto what was rightfully his. "Whisper winds heard me curse him once," Jed said, eyes narrowing. "Next morning, the whole ridge was buzzing with it. And he shows up at my door with a shotgun, claiming I started the rot." The others nodded, murmurs rising like steam. I caught it all, the tape spool turning slow. Back in the cabin, I fired up the player after a supper of canned beans heated on the stove. The wood creaked under my boots as I settled at the table, lamp casting long shadows. Harlan's voice crackled first, clear as recorded. But midway through, after Bessie's tale, a pause stretched too long. Then a sound, not wind, but a low susurrus, like leaves scraping slate. It wove into the tape, murmuring fragments I didn't recognize. "Foolish to come here alone." My hand froze on the volume knob. That was my voice, faint but unmistakable, from a late-night call to my ex weeks back, confessing how the breakup had left me hollow. I'd never spoken it aloud in Blackthorn, never voiced that regret to anyone here. I rewound, heart picking up a notch in my chest, throat tightening dry. Played it again. There it was, spliced seamless between Jed's grudge and the group's chuckles. The whispers followed, carrying my words outward, as if the tape itself breathed. I chalked it up to interference, maybe a radio bleed or the recorder's old wiring. But sleep came fitful, the pines outside hissing softly against the window. Next morning I drove back to the hall, tape in hand, figuring I'd ask if anyone heard odd echoes during the session. The air hung still, no breeze to speak of, but folks eyed me sharper than before. Harlan cornered me by the truck. "You play that back yet?" he asked, voice low. I nodded, fumbling the keys. "Heard something extra in it?" When I admitted the splice, my voice unbidden, he didn't blink. "Wind's got you already. They listen when you record, pull in what's unsaid." He spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Best burn that tape before it spreads." I didn't burn it. Curiosity gnawed, so that afternoon I sat in on another session, this one at a porch overlooking the valley. The group was smaller, faces weathered by sun and suspicion. They talked of lost kin, debts unpaid, grievances knotted tight as kudzu. One woman, Clara, spoke of her brother's betrayal over an inheritance, her words clipped. The winds took my anger and flung it back at him. He hung himself in the barn, but not before the holler turned on me. I shifted in my seat, the recorder warm in my lap, and without thinking, let slip a question about proof. They fell silent, stares pinning me. That night, the cabin felt smaller. I hit play on the new tape, the flame in the stove popping irregular. Their voices rolled out, then the pause, longer this time. My own words bled in, not just the old confession, but fresh ones. Doubts I'd muttered to myself that morning about prying too deep, about how Blackthorn's isolation mirrored my own failures. Should have stayed away, let the secrets rot. The whispers amplified it, layering in echoes of Clara's pain, Jed's curse twisting my doubts into accusations, as if my regrets were fueling their feuds, binding us all. Sweat beaded on my forehead, fingers trembling as I ejected the tape. Outside, the wind rose, not a gale, but a steady murmur threading through the trees, carrying snatches of voices. Harlan's drawl, Bessie's laugh, and mine woven through, confessing aloud now, "I came here to steal your stories, to make them mine." My pulse thudded in my ears. I stepped to the door, cracking it open. The hollers below lay shrouded in twilight, but the sound persisted, rising like a chorus, pulling at threads I'd left loose. My ex's unanswered calls, the grant proposal I'd fudged to fund this trip, the way I'd dismissed my father's warnings about chasing ghosts. By midnight, I couldn't stay inside. I grabbed a flashlight, boots crunching gravel as I hiked the ridge path, tape player slung over my shoulder. The beam cut erratic through fog, revealing roots like veins underfoot. The whispers dogged me, clearer up high, blending my voice with the community's undercurrents. Land grabs echoing my career envy, family rifts mirroring my isolation. Each gust seemed to probe, inserting my flaws into their lore. Barrett Quill, the outsider who'd stirred the pot, his confessions now ammunition for old scores. I reached to overlook, chest heaving, the valley a black expanse dotted with faint lights. Wind buffeted, and in it a new layer, Clara's voice, laced with mine. "He asked for proof, but he's the thief." My knees buckled, hands gripping the recorder till the plastic bit into my palms. They weren't just stories anymore. The winds were archiving me, weaving my unspoken shames into Blackthorn's grievances, turning the archivist into the archived. If I left now, would it follow, or had I already spoken enough to let it loose? Dawn broke gray, and I drove down the mountain that morning, tapes in the glove box. But even on the highway with miles between us, the car's vents hummed faint, murmurs of secrets carried far, my voice among them, unresolved. The wind howled outside like a living thing, clawing at the cabin's wooden walls. I'd built this place myself, high in the Georgia Appalachians, to get away from everything. City noise, people, the grind. Off-grid meant peace, or so I thought. But now, 3 days into this blizzard, it felt like a cage. Snow piled against the door in drifts that blocked any chance of leaving, and the temperature inside hovered just above freezing despite the wood stove I'd been feeding non-stop. I sat at the rough-hewn table, my hands chapped from splitting logs, counting out the last of the canned beans and jerky. Water from the rain barrel was low, tainted with a faint metallic tang from the thaw earlier in the fall. I rationed a single cup for the day, sipping it slow to make it last. The power was out, of course. No solar panels in this whiteout. But the short-wave radio was my one link to the world. Batteries were holding, barely. I twisted the dial, static crackling like dry leaves underfoot. At first, it was just weather reports from distant stations, warnings about the storm front that had shut down the interstates. My voice echoed in the empty room as I muttered to myself, "Come on, give me something." Then, a voice broke through, faint and gravelly, cutting over the hiss. "Mayday, Mayday. This is cabin in the ridges, coordinates approximate. Storm's got me pinned, supplies running low. Beans, jerky, water's going bad. Can't get the door open. If anyone's hearing this..." I froze, mug halfway to my lips. The voice was male, strained, like he'd been yelling for hours. It described my exact setup, the off-grid isolation, the rations, even the wind's pitch against the walls. I leaned closer to the radio, knob turned all the way up. "Who is this? This is Donovan Slate. Repeat, Donovan Slate. You copy?" Static swallowed my words. The signal faded, leaving only the storm's muffled roar. I rubbed my eyes, chalking it up to coincidence. Shortwave bounces weird in bad weather. I'd heard stories of signals looping from old broadcasts. But my pulse thrummed in my ears, and I couldn't shake the way that voice had mirrored my morning, right down to the chapped hands from chopping wood. By evening, the fire was down to embers, and I wrapped myself in the wool blanket, staring at the ceiling beams I'd hewn myself. Sleep came in fits, broken by the wind's relentless push. When I woke in the gray light filtering through the frosted window, the snow had climbed higher, burying the lower panes. I checked the supplies again. 2 cans of beans left, a strip of jerky. The water barrel was down to sludge at the bottom. I forced down a mouthful, the taste bitter on my tongue. The radio stayed on while I worked, its low hum a companion. Around noon, as I shoveled what snow I could from inside the threshold to keep the door from freezing shut, another signal pierced the static, stronger this time, clearer. "Trapped in the cabin, storm won't quit. Rations are beans and jerky, down to nothing. Water's metal tasting, can't melt more snow without fuel. Wind's tearing at the place, been 3 days. Please, anyone." My shovel clattered against the floorboards. The voice was different. Older, maybe, with a thicker drawl. But the words were mine. My situation, word for word. I dropped to my knees by the radio, breath coming quick, fogging the air. "Hello? Identify yourself, this isn't funny." No response, just the fade out into white noise. I paced the small room, boots thudding on the uneven planks. My hands shook as I refilled the stove, fingers fumbling with the kindling. Was it a prank? Some hunter's radio echoing in the valley? But no one knew I was here. That's why I'd chosen this spot. The signals felt too precise, like they'd crawled inside my head. That night, the storm intensified. Branches snapped outside, thudding against the roof like heavy footsteps. I barely slept, eyes fixed on the radio's glow. By morning, 4th day, I figured, though the light barely changed. The signals came more frequently. I twisted the dial less now, waiting for them. The first one that day was a woman's voice, sharp and edged with exhaustion. "Lockdown in the cabin, Georgia Ridges. Off-grid, no way out. Rationing beans, jerky strips, water barrels low, taste like rust. Storm buried the door, 4 days in, respond if you can." I gripped the table edge, knuckles whitening. 4 days. My days. Her tone matched the frustration I'd felt yesterday, the way I'd cursed under my breath at the blocked exit. "Who are you people?" I said aloud, voice hoarse. "This is Slate. Donovan Slate." Tell me what's going on." Silence. Then another voice, male again, overlapping faintly as if the frequencies were bleeding together. "Fifth day now. Cabin holding, but the wind knows my name. Supplies gone. Scavenged the last bean. Radio's picking up echoes. Am I the echo?" The strength of it hit me like a draft from the chimney, loud, almost conversational. I could hear the creak of wood in the background, identical to my own cabin settling. My throat tightened, dry despite the sip of water I'd taken. I hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks before the storm, and now these voices were describing me, anticipating me. Were they from the past, trapped in some loop the storm revived? Or was I tuning into something worse? Souls replaying their end, and this blizzard was the key turning. I tried responding more, keying the mic with questions. "How'd you get here? What year is it?" But only static answered, mocking with bursts of clarity that named my isolation. One signal described checking the rain barrel at dawn, the metallic tang, just like I'd done. Another spoke of the wool blanket's itch against chapped skin, the fire's dying embers. Each one pulled at me, stronger, as if the radio was drawing power from the storm itself. By what I guessed was the fifth evening, the signals ran continuous, a chorus of distress weaving through the static. Voices from different decades I pieced together, mentions of old wars, prohibition, even earlier, all pinned in this same ridge, same lockdown. A gravelly one from the 50s, maybe. Cabin in the Appalachians, storm's a beast. Rations low, radio's all I've got. It's picking up my own voice now, looping back. My hands trembled as I adjusted the antenna, a wire I'd strung along the rafters. The clarity sharpened. I swear I heard my own breathing in the pauses. I hadn't eaten since morning, the jerky turning to dust in my mouth. The door was a solid wall of white now, unyielding when I shoved against it. I sat by the radio, not moving as the voices grew. One, a deep timbre like my uncle's, said, "The storm's not trapping me. I'm slipping into it. The frequency's pulling." I felt it then, a pull in my chest, like the air pressure dropping before thunder. My reflection in the dark window looked hollow, eyes shadowed. Was the storm replaying them? These lost signals from folks who'd frozen or starved in their own cabins? Or was I the replay, the one fading into the dial? My words destined to echo for the next fool. The last clear voice came as night fell, overlapping all the others in a murmur. "Donovan Slate, if that's you hearing this, it's your turn. The signals get stronger till you can't tell yours from theirs." I reached for the power switch, but my finger hovered. The static hummed invitingly, and outside the wind whispered my name. Or was that just another frequency bleeding through? The fire popped once, low, and I sat there listening as the cold seeped deeper into the bones of the cabin. I've been fixing up these old places for years now, out in the anthracite patches of Pennsylvania where the coal veins run black and deep under the hills. The work's steady if you don't mind the dust and the solitude. Most houses are just empty shells, stripped by time or scavengers. But this one, the miner's cottage on the edge of Shamokin, felt different from the start. Boarded up tight, windows crisscrossed with plywood that had warped and peeled. The realtor said it had been vacant since the 70s, after the last strike broke the families here. I figured a week's labor. Patch the roof, shore up the walls, make it livable for some fool chasing cheap rent. I pried the front door open with my crowbar, the hinges groaning like they hadn't moved in decades. Inside, the air hung thick, stale with mildew and something sharper, like wet earth after a rain. The cottage was small, 1 story, 2 rooms, a kitchen that doubled as a parlor. Floorboards sagged under my boots, and the wallpaper peeled in yellow strips, revealing plaster cracked like old skin. I set my toolbox down and got to it, starting with the walls. They were the worst, bulging in places as if something inside was pushing out. By midday, I'd torn into the bedroom wall with a hammer and chisel. Dry rot had eaten through the lath, so I chipped away to assess the damage. That's when I found it. Not rot, but fungi. Not the usual kind you see in damp basements, white and fuzzy. This stuff was darker, clustered like tight fists of black tendrils sprouting from the studs. They pulsed faintly when my light hit them, releasing a fine dust that caught in the beam. Spores, probably. I didn't think much of it at first. Cough once or twice, mask up next time. But as I hacked deeper, a whole nest broke free, crumbling into the air. I inhaled sharp, the particles burning my throat like ash from a coal stove. I stepped back, wiping my face, but the dust lingered, settling on my skin. That night, crashing in my truck down the road, I woke up sweating, my chest tight. Not sick exactly, just off. Like the air in the cottage had followed me. I shook it off, brewed coffee black as the mines, and headed back at dawn. The place looked the same, but the silence felt heavier, pressing in. I patched the roof first, up on the ladder, nailing shingles while the wind whispered through the pines. Every nail I drove echoed inside, sharp and final. By afternoon, I was back inside, sanding the floors. That's when the first memory hit. Not mine, but the house's. Or that's how it felt. I was on my knees, the sander humming, when a creak came from the corner, slow and deliberate like floorboards shifting under weight. No one else there, just me. But in my head, clear as a voice, I saw it. A man in workman's clothes, late 30s, staring at his wife across the kitchen table. She was mending a shirt, her fingers steady but her eyes hard. He'd promised her he'd quit the union talks, stay safe in the shaft, but he hadn't. The strike was coming, and he'd lied to keep the peace. The creak was her foot tapping, accusing him without a word. I froze, Sonda idling in my hand, pulse thudding in my ears. My palms went slick on the handle. I stood up, shook my head. Dust from the spores messing with my lungs, that's all. I'd read about it once, hallucinations from mold. But the image stuck, replaying as I worked. I moved to the kitchen, prying up loose cabinets. Another creak, this one from the wall I'd opened yesterday. Deeper now, like a sigh. And there it was again. The wife, whispering to her sister in the parlor while the man slept off his shift. The sister had a job in town, cleaner work, and the wife envied it. She'd told her husband lies about the sister's visits, small ones to cover late nights, but they festered. The creak was the door easing shut behind the sister, sealing the secret. My hands trembled as I fitted a new board into place. I hadn't eaten since morning, throat dry as bone. These weren't dreams. They played out in flashes tied to the house's sounds. Every shift of settling wood pulled another thread. I tried ignoring it, focusing on the work. Measure twice, cut once. But by evening, as the light faded through the grimy windows, The accusations turned inward. I was sealing the fungi nest, spraying it with bleach to kill whatever was left. The chemical sting mixed with that earthy spore scent, making my eyes water. A groan from the rafters overhead, long and low. This time it was me I saw, or a version of me. Back in Scranton 5 years ago, before the divorce, I'd told Ellen I was working late, fixing a neighbor's garage, but really I'd been at the bar, drowning the fights we'd been having. One night turned to a few and she found out. The creak was her key in the lock, coming home early, the silence after that heavier than any shout. I'd betrayed her quiet trust, piece by piece, until the house we shared felt like a stranger's. I dropped the spray bottle, bleach sloshing across the floor. My breath came quick, ragged, heart pounding against my ribs. It wasn't the house accusing me. It was using its own ghosts to drag mine up. The spores had burrowed in, turning every sound into a mirror. I grabbed my jacket, headed for the door, but paused. The job wasn't done. Can't leave a client hanging. Next morning I returned with a mask, but it didn't help. The air inside hummed with it now, the history seeping from the walls like damp. I wired new outlets in the parlor, sparks jumping from the drill. A pop from the socket and the flash brought a new scene, the miner's brother, crashing on the couch after a shift, eyes hollow from the dark. The miner had covered for him once, lied to the foreman about his drinking, but it cost them both a bonus. The brother knew, and the resentment built, silent as coal dust in the lungs. The pop was the brother's bottle clinking on the table, a toast that never came. My drill slipped, nicking my thumb. Blood welled up, but I barely felt it. Too busy fighting the knot in my gut. These weren't random. They were betrayals, small and everyday, the kind that erode a life without a single raised voice. The house remembered them all, and now it was feeding them to me, making me relive my own. Ellen's face in the kitchen light, her quiet, "How was your day?" loaded with doubt. My fine every time, another lie stacking up. By midday, the tension coiled tight in my shoulders, every muscle aching from clenching. I took a break on the porch, smoking a cigarette, but even the wind carried it. A rustle in the siding, like whispers through cracks. Inside, the wife had turned on her husband during the strike, slipping word to the company about his union meetings. Not for money, but spite. After years of his absences. The rustle was papers folding, a note passed in secret. And me? I'd done the same to my brother last year, taking credit for a job lead he'd found just to get ahead. He never said a word, but the distance grew. I stubbed the cigarette, hands shaking so bad I missed the ashtray. Couldn't keep this up. But walking away meant admitting it. The spores, the history, all of it real. I went back in, finished the wiring with mechanical precision, ignoring the creaks that now layered over each other, a chorus of quiet resentments. The cottage seemed smaller, walls closing in, every nail I'd driven a reminder of foundations cracked by trust broken. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I packed my tools. The place was patched, functional, but I wouldn't sleep here. Driving away, the rear view showed the cottage shrinking, but the sounds followed. A faint creak in the truck's frame like an echo. My own accusations now. The spores were in me, rooting deep, turning every silence into suspicion. I'd tell the realtor it was ready, but I knew. This house doesn't let go easy. Its betrayals cling, waiting for the next handyman to stir them up. And mine, they're just beginning to whisper. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as the rental car's tires crunched over the gravel road, the kind that wound up into the Virginia highlands like a vein pulsing through the earth. My name's Jasper Thorne, and I'd come here chasing ghosts, not the supernatural kind, but the paper trail of my family tree. Dad had left me a box of yellowed documents before he died, names and dates scribbled in his shaky hand, pointing to these hills. Something about our roots running deep, too deep. The air through the cracked window carried the damp rot of rhododendrons, thick bushes that swallowed the light and made the forest feel like it was closing in. By midday, I'd parked at a pull-off marked by a faded sign. Thorn Hollow, private property. No gate, just a footpath choked with vines. I slung my backpack over one shoulder, notebook, trowel, a flashlight, and started hiking. The slope steepened quick, my boots sinking into the soft soil, and sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill. Birds didn't call here. The silence pressed against my ears like wet cloth. I figured the graveyard was up ahead, based on an old map I'd sketched from Dad's notes. Family plot, he called it. Lost to time, maybe. The thicket parted after an hour, revealing a clearing ringed by those gnarled rhododendrons, their leaves glossy and unyielding. Moss-covered stones jutted from the ground like broken teeth, some tilted, others half-sunk. I wiped my brow and approached the nearest one, brushing dirt from the inscription. Elias Thorne, 1823 to 1897. My great-great-something grandfather, straight from the records. Heart rate picked up a notch. This was real. I moved to the next. Margaret Thorne, 1850 to 1924. Matching. But then I saw it. A stone set back under the overhang of branches, newer looking, lichen just starting to claim it. Jasper Elias Thorne, 1985 to 2047. My throat went dry. That was my birth year. My full name. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, but the carved letters stayed put. Future death date, 50 years off. A prank? But who? This land hadn't seen outsiders in generations, according to the county clerk I'd called last week. Hands trembling slightly, I pulled out my phone, no signal of course, and snapped a photo. Kept moving, telling myself it was a coincidence, a shared name. But the next stone, Lillian Thorne, 2012 to 2089. My sister's name, her birth year. She was alive, back in Richmond, oblivious to this madness. The air grew heavier, like the rhododendrons were exhaling fog. I knelt by a cluster of smaller markers, half buried. One read, Thorn Air, 2034. No first name, just that. My stomach knotted. I hadn't married, no kids planned. But the implication hung there, cold as the mist curling around my ankles. I traced the dates with my finger, the stone rough under my skin. These weren't forgeries. The weathering matched the older ones, subtle cracks from decades of rain. How? I sat back on my heels, breath coming quicker, and scanned the plot. Maybe a dozen stones, all thorns, looping back through time. But forward too, into a lineage that included me, extended beyond. Sun dipped lower, shadows stretching like fingers across the graves. I needed answers, something solid. The trowel felt heavy in my pack, but I pulled it out anyway. Started digging at the base of my namesake stone, not deep, just enough to see if there was a foundation plaque or disturbed earth. Soil came away in clumps, dark and loamy, smelling of minerals and decay. My arms burned after 10 minutes, but I kept at it, the repetitive scrape of metal on dirt the only sound breaking the quiet. That's when I hit something hard, not rock but flat. I cleared the dirt, revealing a metal box, rusted at the edges, about the size of a cigar tin. Heart pounding now, palms slick, I pried it open with the trowel. Inside, folded papers, brittle but intact. A letter, dated 1952 in faded ink. To the next Jasper. The cycle binds us. The mountains take what they gave. Plant no new seed here. The roots reclaim their own. Signed, Jasper Thorne. My grandfather? No. Checking the dates in my notebook, this was my great-uncle, the one Dad said vanished up here in '52. Below the letter, a family tree sketch, branching out with names I recognized, but the lines curved impossibly, looping back on themselves. My branch led to that unborn heir in 2034, then circled to Elias in 1823, and there, marked in red, the debt returns. I sat there, staring, the chill seeping through my jeans. Debt? What debt? My mind raced, piecing fragments from Dad's stories. Thorns settling these hills in the 1800s, making a pact with the land for prosperity, but at a cost. He'd laughed it off as folklore, but now... The rhododendrons rustled without wind, leaves whispering against each other. I folded the papers, stuffed them in my pack, and stood, legs unsteady. Had to get out, think this through back at the motel. But as I turned, I noticed the earth around the stones, soft like it had been turned recently. Not by me. Night fell fast in the highlands, the path a black ribbon under my flashlight beam. Branches snagged at my sleeves, as if reluctant to let go. By the time I reached the car, my breath was ragged, hands shaking so bad I fumbled the keys twice. Drove down in the dark, headlights cutting through the mist that rolled in like smoke. At the motel, a dingy place off the highway, I spread the papers on the bed under the harsh lamplight. The tree made no sense linearly. It was a wheel, generations folding into each other. My death in 2047, then rebirth as that heir. No, impossible. But the dates aligned with births I'd verified. My father's in 1955, tying back to the loop. Slept fitful, dreams of roots wrapping my ankles, pulling me down. Woke to rain pattering the window, throat parched. Called Lillian that morning, voice steady as I could manage. "Sis, you ever hear Dad talk about a family curse or something?" She chuckled, light and dismissive. "Jasper, you and your genealogy obsession. He said the mountains keep their secrets, that's all. Why?" I hesitated, told her about the stones. Silence stretched, then, "Come home. Sounds like you're seeing things." But I wasn't. Drove back up after coffee, the road slick, wipers thumping rhythmically. The graveyard looked different in the rain, stones gleaming wet, rhododendrons bowed under the downpour. I went straight to the spot I'd dug, trowel in hand again. Deeper this time, past the box, until the hole was knee-deep, mud caked my jeans, water pooling at my feet. Hit another layer, bones, small ones, wrapped in decayed cloth. Animal? No. The curve of a human finger bone, etched with a faint carving, a thorn symbol. I recoiled, breath hitching but didn't retch. Just stared, rain mixing with the dirt on my face. Buried offerings? Or worse, family kept here against their will? Pulled out a larger bone fragment, careful, and saw the inscription scratched into it. The cycle claims the blood, 1998. That was the year I'd left for college. The last time Dad was healthy. My bloodline bound. Not a curse, but a tether. The land demanding continuity, refusing end. Those future dates weren't predictions. They were schedules. The mountains dictating when a thorn would return to feed the soil. I'd felt it yesterday, the pull in my gut, like the hills were breathing with me. I filled the hole quick, hands numb, the rain masking any noise. Backed away from the stones, rhododendrons parting just enough. But as I reached the path, a low rumble echoed. Not thunder, but the ground shifting, subtle, like a sigh. My pulse thrummed in my ears. I ran then, branches whipping my face, until the car door slammed behind me. Drove without looking back. But in the rear view, the mist seemed thicker, following. Weeks later, back home, the papers locked in a drawer. Lillian visited once, saw the photos, went pale. "Burn them," she said, voice tight. But I can't. The pull's still there, faint, like roots under skin. Last night, I dreamed of the hollow again, the stones waiting. My hands shook as I woke, dry throat aching for highland air. The cycle doesn't break, it waits. And one day, I'll drive back up, because the mountains refuse to release what's theirs.